I've been driving for a good 3.5 hours from Riyadh to Bahrain. It's a long drive. When I do it solo, I get a lot of time to do a lot of thinking and self-reflection. I went through some thoughts, some messages. I have the weekly digest from my chief of staff. One of the best roles I've ever hired for is a chief of staff. A chief of staff sounds like a fancy title, and the name I think came from, or the title came from politics. The president would have a chief of staff. But the simplest way for me to explain what a chief of staff does is that they are an extension of the CEO. In other words, a chief of staff is the execution arm of the CEO. As a founder and CEO, you have to be involved in a lot of conversations. You have to be in a lot of different rooms at the same time. And when you are in a lot of different rooms, there's a lot of context switching that you're doing, especially if you're deciding on things or talking about actions that need to be done. When you leave the room and you go into another one, you sometimes don't have enough time to do the actual work. So let's say you're in a meeting and you say, oh, I'm going to send you this thing, or, I need this from you. And then you forget to follow up on the thing because there are a lot of things going on in your mind, and you don't have the capacity to kind of follow up and check in later. And a chief of staff would basically step in and be in all the rooms, be in all the meetings that you're in, and their job would be to document what needs to be done, and the things that you need to do that they can do on your behalf, they can just execute without involving you. And then the things that other people say that they will do, they can go and follow up on those things with those people. And that just increases your potential by 3x. That was my experience, and I had a couple of attempts in recruiting a chief of staff, and they didn't, maybe the first couple attempts didn't work out very well, but I got lucky with John, who's my current chief of staff. He's been with us for about 1.5 years now. And one of the most amazing things he does for me is this Notion page called the CEO Digest. Every week I start my week by reading that. So he basically summarizes everything that has happened in the week before, whether I was involved in it or I was not involved in it. Basically, it's broken down into some updates being just FYI. This is for your info. It's nice to know. And you want to be involved in this topic. So I thought you should know that this update has happened. I checked with this person on this project, and this is what they said. That person got back to you on this, and they wanted you to know this piece of info. So the first type of update is an FYI. The second is FYA, so for your action. So this person requested this thing and they need your approval. And here's the link for the Slack message where you can go in and give them your opinion, give them your approval. And the third type is maybe more of open questions. These are things that we need to discuss. These are things that we need to kind of go through in our one-on-one or throughout next week. And maybe some are for high-level projects that we set at the beginning of the quarter, at the beginning of the year. So they're just follow-ups on here's what happened here, here's what happened there. So who should hire a chief of staff? In your super early days, maybe as you're a few people in a startup, you might not need a chief of staff, although some people would say even as early as that, it doesn't harm to hire a chief of staff. I didn't experience having a chief of staff back then, and now that I think of it, now that I've experienced what it's like, if I'm going to start something else in the future, I think I would probably need a chief of staff from day one. And it's quite different from an executive assistant. Both are important roles, but an executive assistant is someone who does the admin tasks, the admin follow-ups. So if you need to sign a bunch of documents, they will organize them for you. They organize your schedule. But a chief of staff is usually more senior, and they're with you in the room in every meeting, and they support you in navigating those meetings and those projects throughout the day, but also connected to the annual goals or the quarterly goals and so on. So I think you should hire a chief of staff when you are when you have maybe 20 plus people. I think that would be a good point, because that's the point when you start to not know everything that's happening in every room, and that's when you start to need to maybe context switch a lot. There isn't like a magic formula for it, really. You can like have one as your first employee. You can have one super later on. But I just think having the right profile, having the right person on board is just going to 3x your productivity. So why not do that sooner? One of the best resources on who is the ideal chief of staff and how to find them and how to hire them and how to communicate with them is written by this guy called Matt Moshari. Matt Moshari is one of the best coaches in the world, and he actually coached Sam Altman from OpenAI. He coached Naval. He coached a lot of the, OGs of Silicon Valley, or a lot of the superstars of Silicon Valley. He used to be an entrepreneur himself, and then he went into filmmaking, and then he went into philanthropy, and then he found his fulfillment in coaching. So he wrote a lot of content about chief of staff as a concept and as a title, and he strongly recommends founders to recruit a chief of staff, and he talks about like what type of chief of staff works best and so on. And he actually doesn't coach any founder unless they have a chief of staff themselves, because he realizes how much that unlocks from the founder, and it allows them to like focus on the thinking and the strategy, and then they are able to delegate a lot of the execution and the follow-up to someone that's very capable. There are a few interviews for Matt Moshari online on the topic of chief of staff. And he has a few interviews. He has an interview with Naval where he talks about how they talk about how from the coaching sessions, Matt Moshari convinced Naval that he can step down as CEO from his company AngelList. It was not bringing him a lot of happiness. And he had this thought in the back of his head that if he quits the job, then the company is not going to do as well. And Matt actually showed him that it would do better if he brings in the right person, and that's what he did, and the company did much better after he left. He's still supported from a board and potentially chairman perspective, but he was not involved in the day-to-day. There's another interview that's really nice with Justin Khan from Justin.tv that ended up being Twitch. He also coached Justin, and there are a couple other interviews that he did with different founders, so I highly recommend you watch them. And he has a full curriculum publicly published online on who is the best chief of staff for you, and how should you onboard them, and what is the actual job. I highly recommend you recruit a chief of staff as soon as you can. They usually come from consulting backgrounds, but ideally if they have been consultants and they've also worked in startups, that's the best combination of experiences, because being a consultant allows you to be focused on execution, and I know it sounds a bit counterintuitive because consulting doesn't sound like it has a lot of execution, but it does have a lot of horizontal work. It has a lot of coordination, a lot of strategy work, breaking down concepts from an idea to research on the market to basically the requirements that you need, the things that you need to get it done and execute it. So it gives the person a very interesting perspective on how to tackle projects. And then if they have operating experience within a startup, then they would understand the culture, they would understand how things move really fast, and how nothing matters until you have results, and a few things that you can only learn by being in a startup. So hire a chief of staff as soon as you can. Go on and read Matt Moshari, kind of like a guidebook on how to hire a chief of staff, and go watch his podcasts and interviews on the topic.